You've talked about seven wars. We've already had six, so are you saying that there is another war in the planning?
Yes, I am saying just that. If you want to talk about the wars, the first one was the War of Independence, in which the Templar lodges played the major part. The second one was the French Revolution, which was dominated by Templar lodges. The third one was the American Civil War, which was dominated by Templar lodges. The fourth one was World War One, along with the Russian Revolution. That leaves one war left. Now, Red Masonry and its various structures played the significant part in both the Russian Revolution and in World War Two. This leaves us with thoughts about Armageddon Masonry, which is very real, and therefore in the Book of Revelation you have seven wars, and so they have planned to bring about their wars in seven phases. I've said that they plan roughly 120 years ahead of acting. So what I can tell you is that if you go back to 1881, you will then find a significant pool of activity preparing for war in the Middle East. What you then do is add the 120 years to 1881 and you end up with 2001, and for reasons that I've gone into later on with September the 11th. The planning for a war in the Middle East is very, very complicated, it's very clever, and the planning went on, as I say, over that span of time. What I would point to is how very dangerous this undercover, underhand bankers arrangement is. People have gone to sleep and they have forgotten perhaps that we are safe simply because of eternal vigilance.
So, how does the European Union fit in with all this?
Well, the European Union was planned in secret in Canada in 1942. The bankers who met to discuss the European Union were directly related to those who paid for the Russian Revolution and were involved in other wars. So in 1942, the bankers who had bankrolled Hitler moved rapidly out of the way and abandoned him and began to plan for their future during the peace years. We talk about something like the Maastricht Treaty or something like that in the 1990s as the doorways through into Europe, but we need to know that it is based upon the Ventotene Manifesto, which was produced by the Italians in 1941-42 in secret. So when we're dealing with the European Union, we're dealing with yet one more step into a society that is controlled by bankers and run by bankers and has very little to do with human freedom, dignity and liberty. The European Union itself, in a sort of slightly longer origin, was produced by a Lombard agent called Giuseppe Mazzini in 1837. So you've got to add 120 years to that to find that the European process is opened up in 1957. 1837 we had Giovine Europa, which was the idea of the United States of Europe, which was also called for in 1849 by the Knights Templar Order of Zan leader, Grand Master Victor Hugo. What we've seen with the European Union is something that is akin very closely to the East India Company. When it traded in India, it made people pay into the system, and by paying into the system, the East India got very rich and didn't do anything, and then the payers were allowed to trade. So what you've got in the European Union is something remarkably similar to something we've seen before. Over a period of time, very sadly, we've seen our laws being eroded by the power that was in Europe before it moved to Canada in 1942. We've seen the freedom of our voting system moved into some sort of corporate voting arrangement. So I believe that in Europe we've seen the growth of the old oligarchy. One of the weapons in their armoury is a thing called synarchy. And synarchy has appeared before the French Revolution, in the French Revolution, throughout the process of World War. And another word for it is Nazi communism. And what happens with the process of synarchy is that you get a very right-wing arrangement that runs a left-wing commune. So synarchy is what really is happening at the moment to the free world. We are manoeuvring into control by bankers, but the people who are caught up in this are to be no more than peasants in a commune. And I can trace this synarchy movement as a very, very powerful movement through Europe, into America, and in association with what are called the hawks in America of recent times. So synarchy is a very real thing. The bankers, particularly in America, and I'm thinking of one or two of them, I would think of Rockefeller, for instance, who repeatedly backs communism and says what a good thing communism is, whilst at the same time enjoying remarkable riches. What is happening in the sowing of socialism and communism and the left wing is simply the formation of a peasant commune. So if you look at the Reece Committee of Congress, who investigated education in America, they came up with the startling conclusion that religion was being removed. And remember, I talked about religion as one of the 4 points. And socialism, a form of socialism, is being introduced into the schools by the various trusts concerned. So you see, what we're being prepared for is a left-right commune. If you listen to the Ford Foundation, they stated quite clearly that what they intended to do was unite America, minus its constitution, with Russia in Europe, which, bearing in mind, is, from my point of view, a Lombard concern, as part of the process of then moving on to greater things in greater parts of the world. So you've got the left wing and you've got the right wing. And if you want to look at the foundation of something like the United Nations, you'll find that the founder, John Dulles, who is part of the banking ring, was an extreme right-wing leader, a real extremist who believed in a super race and eugenics, and he created an entirely communist committee for the United Nations. By looking at this and studying it, you begin to discover that there is an actual process going on which is gathering pace, and that is that when we go to sleep, and if we sleep for too long, we will emerge in a society which is very right-wing, as with the Third Reich, in which the rights of the people are curtailed to the point of really left-wing peasantry. And that is the process that we're also going through at the present time. When people talk about the new world order, it's a lot nastier than they think it is.
There are many trends that just seem to take hold. Is there any way they have of altering our society or our perceptions of things?
Well, yes, indeed. And I think I should say that the first point is the Council of Foreign Relations, which is really the round table which came out of the Treaty of Versailles, tends to recruit the top echelon of leadership in the United States of America. And it was started by the Rockefeller bankers and other bankers allied to him, of course. So you've got a huge pressure group in America which doesn't like sovereignty. I suspect doesn't like the Constitution too much and is constantly crying for New World Order. You've also got an offshoot of that which is called the Bilderberg Group, which is founded by exactly the same people, the same bankers. And that is pushing out policies for the European dimension, the European Union, and is a link to round-table trading of one sort and another. And that in turn has also produced the Trilateral Commission, which again is Rockefeller's Brzezinski, and the Trilateral Commission has been extremely active in the Middle East in a variety of ways, for instance, removing the Shah of Iran and so on and so forth. So certainly you've got these secret groups which are being allowed to function, which are tending to shape both our policies, political situations and trading. Then there's another whole section that does affect us. We talk first of all about functionalism. Functionalism takes a nation, let us say Britain, and divides it into 4. So instead of having a powerful Westminster government, it will have something running Scotland, Ireland, England and Wales. Functionalism starts to break up the pattern of a nation and substitutes regions. Some of these regions are quite big and some of them are quite small. So there is functionalism. Its main centre is Bellagio in Italy, and that was given by a banker or banker's widow to the Rockefellers. We've got the Green Movement, which was plugged very powerfully by the BBC, much to my annoyance. The Green Movement, in fact, is a hoax created by the Club of Rome, which is another branch of what we're talking about. It is supported from Holland by Bilderberg members, and it has evaded the issue of ice ages and all the things that have profoundly altered our climate since the beginning of time, and has tried to suggest that CO2 create temperature changes. The Green Movement, in design, is to prevent, or an attempt to prevent, the development of America economically and of Britain economically, to take the raw materials and resources from Africa by dumbing down their development and insisting on green policies, and it is in support of their investments in China and in India, where lots of black smoke follows the money trail. I've written at length on the Green Movement simply to show that it is an absolute hoax. The propaganda from the bankers is such that you would think the Green Movement has, this is man-made global warming we're really talking about, has a huge following. In fact, it doesn't. The vast majority of scientists have already said that it is a fraud and a deliberate one. And there we've had a period of history where we've actually been encouraged to abandon Britain's Industrial Revolution and Britain's movement of manufacture into an era where there'll be no oil. So basically we're being seriously affected by the green movement in a way that we don't even think is happening. But the people have lost the idea of fighting for industry, getting our industries going, getting industrial revolution going, and then providing the schools and the hospitals that we really want to see. So that's the green movement is very sinister, but I can tell you that it comes from the Club of Rome. Then there's the Frankfurt movement, which began in 1942 roughly, but began to bite very hard in 1945. What this movement does is to separate, or try to separate, children from their parents, the attitude of children from parental obedience to disobedience. It inspires immorality of every possible kind. It disturbs the relationship between men and women. It is basically an undermining process that was directly behind the hippie movement and is directly behind what we might call radical counterculture, where the structure of the nation is being eroded. Frankfurt is a very manipulative process that was also used to promote the Cold War in Europe, the East-West divide which you now see being placed into the Middle East. So Frankfurt is not a pleasant thing. It first manifested itself out of the OSS and CIA in America, took over the European wing of the CIA and began to work its tricks both on Britain and on Europe. There's also, of course, socialism itself, but that's really political. It's trying to head us into becoming an obedient socialist commune. And the roots of socialism can be traced back to Venetian agents talking now of the Darwinian period and what is called Darwinian socialism, because the Lombards also produced Darwin's theory of evolution. There are then other groups operating, and one of them is Common Purpose, which has infiltrated many of the groups and establishments in this country. We are told that it's in the BBC and the police and so on and so forth. There are supposed to be a large number of recruits who basically are working beyond authority, which means that they are networking outside the groups that we normally depend upon and may start twisting planning and all sorts of other things to their own advantage, including linking up with functionalism, which means a disintegrating country being placed into the hands of a foreign power. Common Purpose is also called Marburg in the United States of America, and Marburg came from the Carnegie organization. So they're the same process. And I've already talked a little bit about Syndicate, but Syndicate is also the same process as Marburg and Common Purpose. So you'll see that we've got these various groups acting both separately and also together to bring about changes. So if you go abroad and you stay abroad for a long time, perhaps you work overseas or something like that for 3 years, you come back, you'll suddenly think, my goodness, things have changed. You don't see it happening as it's happening, but you can see it by stepping out of the situation and then stepping back into it again. And the result of all these organisations is that we are beginning to lose not only our sovereignty, but also our direction as a people.